Greetings to one and all. Happy to talk to you tonight about the enduring ancient Egyptian Theosophy. We will explain how ancient Egypt is the origin of alchemy and present-day Sufism, and how the mystic Theosophists of Egypt camouflage their practices with a thin layer of Islam. We will also explain the progression of the mystical way towards enlightenment, offering a coherent explanation of its fundamentals and practices. Let us first draw a clear distinction between dogmatic and mystical routes. Mankind is always trying to understand its own reason for existence relative to the universe, in which it finds itself placed. There are generally two routes in which to search for the answers. The first one is the dogmatic religions, whose basic assumption is that of a personal God who rules the universe and who communicates his will to man through prophets and lawgivers. This God is directly and personally concerned with the right ordering of this world and with the right and the righteous relationship he wishes to exist between man and man. Hence, he is the ultimate lawgiver. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam fall under this category. The other route is the mystics, who do not believe in a personal God. To call him God at all can only mislead. He is not a person, and it is a principle. It is the principle of unchanging being that is yet the source of all becoming, the stillness that is yet the source of all activity, and the one from which the multiplicity proceeds. So what about Egypt? Let's go back to history. The Greek historian Herodotus, in 500 before our Common Era, stated that of all the nations of the world, the Egyptians are the happiest, healthiest, and most religious. The excellent conditions of the Egyptians were attributed to their application of metaphysical realities in their daily lives. In other words, total cosmic consciousness. As above, so below, and as below, so above, was the main law of existence for them. There was no perceived difference between sacred and mundane. Every action, no matter how mundane, was in some sense a cosmic corresponding act. Plowing, sowing, reaping, brewing, playing games, all were viewed as earthly symbols for divine activities. The scenes of daily activities found inside Egyptian tombs show a strong perpetual correlation between the earth and heavens. In Egypt, what we now call religion was so widely acknowledged that it did not even need a name, because it is life itself in all its aspects. All their knowledge, which was based on cosmic consciousness, was embedded into their daily practices, which became traditions. The mystical torch of the ancient Egyptian has continued through the practices and the tradition of the silent majority. Some of the silent majority dedicate themselves to further spiritual enlightenment. These mystics of Egypt are called Sufis by others. Actually, they don't like to call themselves Sufis. Just like their ancestors, present-day Egyptian mystics dislike being given any inclusive name that might force them into doctrinal conformity. The Egyptian mystical seekers prefer to call themselves seekers of the way, Ahl al-Tariq. Egyptian mysticism, now known as Sufism, is a name without a reality. It once was a reality without a name. We only use the term mystics or Sufis here to identify them to others. A seeker of the way is anyone who believes that it is possible to have a direct experience of God and who seeks such a path. The Egyptian model of mysticism is a natural expression of personal religion in relation to the expression of religion as a communal matter. It is an assertion of a person's right to seek contact with the source of being and the reality, as opposed to an institutionalized religion, which is based on authority and one-way master-slave relationship, with its emphasis upon ritual observation and legalistic morality. So let us next investigate the source of Sufism. The common premise is that Sufism is an Islamic group practicing a form of mysticism that is or has originated in Persia. The fact is that Sufism has nothing to do with Islam or Persia, and everything to do with the silent, quiet majority of ancient and present-day Egyptians. And we'll explain how. Here are a few introductory facts about Islam not being the source of Sufism. The first item is the mystical seeker who called themselves Sufis have always suffered from Islamic rule throughout the ages. Many have been killed. They have been accused of attempting to make innovation on the dogmas of Islam, of following practices forbidden by the Quran, of denying the very existence of a personal Allah. The tolerance or lack thereof of Sufism in Arabic and Islamic world is closely linked to the whim of the ruler and how he interprets or enforces Islamic law. During certain periods, Sufism was or is tolerated. During other, it was outlawed and condemned. The next point is that the key note of Sufism is the union between man and God, which in Islam is considered blasphemy, and as such punishable by death by any Muslim who is empowered to do so by the Quran itself. A third point is Islamic teachings are characterized by consuming fear of God's wrath. You do this or you go to hell. You do that or you go to hell. Everything is always, punishment is always based on fear. While the Egyptian model of mysticism, the Sufism, emphasized love and not fear. God is perceived in terms of the emotional closeness. Is referred to as the friend, the lover, whose love can be experienced personally and individually. Another point in the list, mysticism or Sufism is based on self-attained revelation by mystical means, which, contrary to Islam, such revelation is experienced by the mystical seekers are considered blasphemy and therefore unpunishable by death. Another point about Islam and Sufism. The Egyptian mystical Sufis include in the ritual practices as well as public festivals specific methods of achieving ecstatic proximity to God through music, dance, or song. This runs contrary to Islam, where music, singing, and dancing are strictly forbidden, as clearly stated on all territory of Islamic laws. And the last point that I like to mention is that, contrary to Islamic doctrine, Egyptian mysticism or Sufism bridged the gulf between man and God with folk saints. Veneration of folk saints and pilgrimages to their shrines represent an important aspect of the Egyptian mystical practices, which is totally against Islamic doctrine. Now let's talk about the country as being the origin of Sufism. The well-known, and here I'm going to refer to, since they are, say, the common statement is that Sufism comes from Persia, so my quotation here will come from an Iranian himself, and an Iranian Sufi himself. The well-known Sufi writer Idris Shah, who was an Iranian himself, admits the role of Egypt via Thoth or Tahuti or Hermes, as well as Dhu and Nun, the Egyptian, on Sufism and alchemy as follows. He writes in his book, alchemical lore came from Egypt, direct from the writing of Thoth. According to Sufi tradition, the lore was transmitted through Dhu and Nun, the Egyptian, the king or lord of the fish, one of the most famous classical Sufi teachers. This quotation comes from Idris Shah's book, The Sufis, which was published in 1964. He also writes in the book, Thoth name appears among the ancient masters of what is now called the way of the Sufis. In other words, both the Sufis and the alchemists recognize Thoth as the foundation of their knowledge. And when it comes to Spain, Idris Shah, who makes a direct reference to the Spanish Arab historian Said of Toledo, who died in 1069, who outlines this tradition of the ancient Egyptian Thoth, also known as Hermes. He specifically states, quote, "Sages affirm that all sciences originate with the Egyptian Hermes." He emphasized the word Egyptian because you'll find that the word Hermes can be used in different locations. But in his quotation, in his book, he stated the Egyptian Hermes. In Upper Egypt, and here again, he specifies where that he is referring to. Okay. The Jews call him Enoch, and the Muslims call him Idris. He was the first who spoke of the material of the superior world, of planetary movement, medicine, poetry, were his function, as well as the science, including alchemy and magic. And this quotation comes from Asin Pleserios Ibn Masara, page 13. Now, let's talk about the country that has the largest number of Sufi followers is Egypt. Practitioners in Sufi followers, who they call orders, are other countries beside Egypt, is very small in comparison. Egyptian conclusion, Egyptian mysticism or Sufism is not an offshoot of Islam. It is the old religion camouflaged into the Islamized, Arabized terms. Egyptian mystic Sufis maintain low profile, for they seek no public glory, but rather the ultimate mystical glory, the divine. And I love to be their spokesman from the far away in the United States. So let's start talking about the subject itself. The Egyptian model emphasized the positive. So the Egyptian model will start with the premise that within each human being, there is a treasure. And this can be found only by looking for it. The Egyptian model of mysticism unleashes the inner hidden potential of the human being to learn, gain knowledge, and achieve. Next, let's talk about the unique balance between intellect and intuition in the Egyptian teaching. Let's first look at the human organ of perceptions and why it is important to balance both intellect and intuition in gaining knowledge. Human faculties, although perceptives, are limited, like a radio that can receive only certain electromagnetic waves and not other parts of the band. The perceived world is therefore a distortion. The inability to transcend the barrier of our limited senses explain human shortcomings in understanding the complete reality of the world around us in all its aspects. The flaw in Western culture is the inflation of the intellect at the expense of intuitive knowledge. This is a one-dimensional thinking, which distort the understanding of reality because it blocks other modes of consciousness. The Egyptian mystics distinguish between the ordinary knowing of fact and the inner knowing of reality. Their activities connect and balance these factors, understanding, being, and knowing. The Egyptian mystical goal is to establish equilibrium between intellect and the inner faculties that, instead of canceling each other, they both must and should interact and enrich one another. Therefore, the Egyptian mystics developed their intuitive modes of consciousness to counterbalance the rational mode. The goal is to achieve equilibrium between rational and non-rational modes of consciousness. The main Egyptian mystical Sufi theme is the importance of consciousness in integrating inner faculties with comprehension through a gradual process. The Egyptian mystics refer to this process as being all organs of perception for a more comprehensive understanding. Using, balancing, and integrating complementary opposites is one of the main and constant themes in ancient Egypt. So let's talk about the progression along the mystical path. The progression is like a progressive sowing and reaping. The progress of a spiritual life is described as a journey or a pilgrimage consisting of a slow progression towards the goal of union with reality. The path or the way is a practical method to guide a mystical seeker through a succession of stages toward the ultimate goal of unification with the divine. The stages of the journey has been variously described in Sufi traditions as consisting sometimes of 7, 10, etc. stages. There are actually 3 stages that can be elaborated into 5, 7, or 10 or more. Each stage of the way is acquired through striving and is a matter of conscious, disciplined action. Whenever an aspirant achieves a certain level of personal development, he or she is rewarded psychologically with certain spiritual liberation. As such, the way consists of spiritual stations and corresponding spiritual states. Stages are steps taken by us, rising, ascending. The states form a similar psychological change. The experience of the spiritual states feel like liberation, releases that descend into one's heart. That sense of relief is equivalent to untying the knots. A problem or a question has been resolved. Such experience will elevate the mystical seeker to a higher level where he or she can continue to learn using both intellect and intuition. There are basically, to summarize it, 3 levels of consciousness in the Egyptian mystical tradition. The first one is the purification process of body and soul. The second level is gaining knowledge through both intellect and intuition, meaning revelation. In this stage, the objective is, in simple term, is like to put the pieces of the cosmic puzzle together. But when you look at the puzzle, we can still see the lines separating the different pieces. The third level on the mystical way is the vanishment. There's the vanishment into the divine essence through cessation of all conscious thought. And in the metaphor of the puzzle, it will be like when you look at the puzzle and it is complete, and the mystic can no longer see any line separating the pieces. The mystical seeker must succeed in each of these levels before advancing to the next higher level. Let's talk a bit about the way of revelations in the Egyptian model. The Egyptian model of mysticism, revelations are accessible to anyone who aspires to seek them. There are no special people chosen by God to receive the revelations. In the hierarchy of existence, the human being is the image of the first principle. By using his capacity for knowledge, the human being may ascend to the highest levels by contemplating his own reality in the mirror of God's existence. Egyptian mysticism consists basically of 2 types of spiritual experience. Number 1, a quest for spiritual self-development in the form of ethical self-control and worldly, personal, religious insight. The aspirant who is able to purify himself or herself is now ready for the second quest. The second quest is to find God in the manifested world, as well as finding the manifested world in God. It is as above, so below, as below, so above. It's always going from one to the other, from the other to the first. This is accomplished through gaining knowledge by using both intellect and intuition in order to transcend the limitations of our human senses. So let's talk about the unity of multiplicity. The ultimate goal of the Egyptian mystical seeker is to realize unity in the multiplicity and the multiplicity in the unity of the universe. In ancient Egyptian tradition, we have Ra, who represent the primeval cosmic creative force. The litany of Ra describe Ra as Ra, who is the joined together, who comes out of his own members. The Egyptian definition of Ra is the perfect representation of the unity that comprises the putting together of the many diverse entities. And also, it recognizes that when it says the one Ra, the wine joined together, who comes out of his own member, it shows that the two-step metaphor of the puzzle is step one involving joining the pieces of the puzzle together. And the second step is seeing all the pieces as one unit. And that will be the unity of multiplicity. So let's also talk about the knowledge by spiritual revelation. Why it is needed? We are unaware of the existence of most of our surroundings, which we do not see and hear, because their frequencies are faster or slower than the sound and light frequencies that our senses can detect. Even though our human faculties are perceptive, they are nevertheless limited, like a radio that can only receive certain electromagnetic waves and not other parts of their band. Our senses are most familiar with matter, the dense form of energy. Lighter and faster forms of existence are beyond our sensory capacities. The perceived world is therefore a distortion. The goal of traveling the spiritual path aims at dispersing the veils that hide the self from the real, and thereby become transformed or absorbed into undifferentiated unity. The zikr is a practice by the Egyptian mystics that provides the means for purified mystical seeker to close the gap between the physical realm and nature and the metaphysical nature. Zikr is a particular method of approach to reality, making use of intuitive and emotional spiritual faculties, which are generally dormant and latent unless called into play through training and guidance. So zikr is the central ritual of the Egyptian mystics. This practice leads to the feeling of oneself's. This practice leads to the freeing of oneself from the body and the limitation of the human senses. As a result, the participant's consciousness is raised, whereby the mystical seeker achieves knowledge of God by ways of revelations, where a state of visionary ecstasy exists. Early Sufi traditions acknowledge that zikr was introduced into Sufism by the Egyptian Dhu Nur al-Masri, who said, quote, "Zikr is the absence from oneself by collecting God alone. The absence from oneself is the ideal recollection of God." The whole of Egyptian mysticism rests on the belief that when the individual self is lost, the universal self is found. The purified mystics strive for loss of self and absorption into the divine in order to obtain the personal illumination, transcendence, and ecstatic visionary. Egyptian mystics is a particular method of approach to reality, which trains and makes use of intuitive and emotional intuition spiritual faculties. This experience result from practicing the zikr, allows the seeker to go beyond the limitation of his senses. It will be like to be free from your physical body. You will be able to have a bird's eye view of the world, where he or she is able to find certain knowledge, patterns, meaning, etc. After the zikr practice is complete, the seeker comes back down to earth, comes back into his body to utilize his newfound knowledge by using his intellect in more efficient way to put the pieces together. Each practice of zikr provides new illumination, which enables the mystical seeker to utilize both intellect, reason, and to realize the totality of the universe. Gaining knowledge is a continuous process of using both intellect and intuition, so they interact with and enrich one another. When the second level of consciousness is reached, that is when the mystical seeker comes to realize that the source of all deeds and action is one source. To use the metaphor again that we use, is the metaphor of the puzzle. The second level is reached when the mystical aspirant is able to find and reassemble all different pieces of the cosmic puzzle. Now the picture is complete, but the lines separating the pieces are still visible in the consciousness. And then comes the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is the unification. The third level of consciousness, it reaches only when the mystical seeker sees the multiplicity in the universe as one indistinguishable unity. In other words, when the mystical seeker sees the whole picture of the cosmic puzzle as one unit, with no lines or distinction separating the pieces. This state is reached when the mystic is able to reconcile all dualities and feel no distinctions between modes, adjuncts, relationship, and aspects. That's to say, they have all melted together in his consciousness. As a result, the mystic himself becomes annihilated, absorbed, immersed into the divine essence. immersed in the unity, he knows not any form of phenomenal being. When the mystic is melted into the divine essence, he becomes the perfected person, or the universal successor, to whom all result for aid. The ultimate constituents of all existence are drawn towards him, just as iron is drawn to magnet. And as such, he is called Qutb, which means magnetic pole. The world of sense is subdued by his might, and he does what he wills by his power. This powerhouse is the shrine of mysticism. Let's talk about one of the practices, important practices for the Egyptian mystics, which is the cyclical renewal festivals. The aim of the Egyptian festivals were and continue to be the rejuvenation and the renewal of cosmic energies. The main theme of ancient Egyptian texts is the cyclical nature of the universe and the constant need for the renewal of such cycles through well-designated festivals. The Egyptians used and continue to view these festivals as part of human existence, which constitute the rhythm of life of the community and individual alike. The rhythm results from the order of cosmic life. The renewal and the rejuvenation of the life of the cosmos, of the community, and the individuals are affected by rites. These rites had and have the power to bring about the rejuvenation and the rebirth of divine life. As such, the ancient and present-day Egyptian festivals came to have the function of enactments of cosmological religious renewal. You may wonder about the structure of the mystical groups in Egypt. So here we are going to refer to them as fellowships, because that's what the Ari are. A mystical seeker is anyone who believes that it is possible to have direct experience with God. The Egyptian, maybe I'm repeating myself here so we can go to the next point. Technically speaking, one does not have to be or born or converted Muslim to adopt and practice this model of mysticism. However, it is true that being a born or converted Muslim is a prerequisite to joining Sufi fellowship inside Islamized countries such as Egypt. Such a requirement is caused by fear of the rise of Islamists in their countless way. So the Egyptian model, or the mystical way, recognized that we are all different. The Egyptian model of mysticism is not a matter of creed and dogma, but rather of personal character. Each one of us is a unique individual. The ancient Egyptians presented their belief in individuality of each of us in their text. For example, there were never two identical transformational or medical texts for any two individuals. Please let me say that again. There was never, ever two identical funerary texts for any two individuals. Each one of them is different than the other. They did not make a mistake or did not make mistakes like some quote unquote Western scholars like to assert. No, it is that they acknowledge the individuality of each of us, and therefore in a funerary text for every individual will be different than anybody else. The Egyptian model recognizes the uniqueness of each individual, and as such recognizes that the path or the ways to God are as numerous as the number of seekers. The ways to God are like the streams. They all go to one source. All Egyptian thinking is based on this principle, variations on a theme. The mystical seekers generate their own kinds of collective life, like-minded seekers form networks of masters and disciples called the way, al-Toro. The framework of a way is better described as a fellowship. An Egyptian model mystic fellowship can be formed anytime and anywhere. The diversity of humankind is reflected in the diversity of fellowships. Hence, fellowships vary in their nature, teaching, exercises, etc. The diverse nature of organized fellowships follow, in general term, the nature of the four elements of the universe, namely fire, air, earth, and water. What are the principles of fellowship? The fellowship must contain the following elements. Number one, a link to a spiritual chain. Number two, a systematic organization consisting of members of various stages of development or progression. Three, a code of ethics. Four, modes and programs to attain the fellowship goals. And five, an active role in the society. Fellowship, the Egyptian model, emphasizes that the person must give back to society. This is my presentation. I hope that you enjoyed it. For further information about this and other related subjects, please check my main website, which is Egyptian Wisdom Center. This is one word, EgyptianWisdomCenter.org, where you will find over 100 free articles, and you will find the list of my books in 10 languages, as well as other related activities like the Egyptian Mystical University and some other performing arts projects. Thank you for listening and watching, and have a great rest of